Welcome everyone to Citizen Diplomacy International. My name is Paul Lachelier. I'm the founder and director of Learning Life. We're a DC-based nonprofit that runs Citizen Diplomacy International, and I chair these quarterly meetings. Please, if you would, introduce yourself in the Zoom chat, including your name, your city, your country, and if you're willing, your email and your LinkedIn profile for our records. You can share that privately to me if you know that I don't have it, and feel free to cut and paste a one paragraph bio about you or a web link with more information about you and your work. We do keep track of this, so it's much appreciated the more information you provide about yourself. I'm going to actually share that information. Hold on a second here in the Zoom chat. Hold on a second here. Okay, so that information shared. Anna is just joining us. Anna Popkova is just joining us from Michigan. She's a professor who, among other things, studies citizen diplomacy. And I'm glad you're here. You'll notice, Anna, that Michelle Bond, who likewise sits on our board of advisors, is here. Michelle is a former ambassador. So beyond that, I just want to give you some introduction to Citizen Diplomacy International. So due to globalization, the internet, rising education levels, and long-term democratization, citizen diplomacy is a growing and it's becoming a more important part of diplomacy and international affairs. So Citizen Diplomacy International, or CDI, is a program and network of Learning Life. We bring together scholars, students, diplomacy professionals, and citizen diplomacy practitioners, as well as interested observers, together every 3 months online through these meetings to share news, research, and presentations on citizen diplomacy developments, local to global, all with an eye to building a vibrant global citizen diplomacy sector for a more participatory, equitable, and sustainable world. I encourage you, if you are not connected to us, I'm going to share into the Zoom chat in a moment a few ways in which you can connect with us. You can subscribe to the CDI bulletin, which we'll be sharing at the end of this meeting. You can also share on LinkedIn. You can connect with us on LinkedIn and on Facebook and follow us on YouTube. So let me just share that in the Zoom chat. Okay, so you have all those links in the Zoom chat there. And you'll notice that this meeting is video recorded. We do post the video records of these meetings to YouTube. So we will be taking screenshots as well during the meeting. So this is a public meeting, and all of these things will be shared. So the video of the meeting, the photos, some photos, the agenda. And the speaker presentations will be shared via email. So we have a larger list of about 1,300 people in 110 countries, 110 plus countries that receive emails about these quarterly meetings. Lastly, or a couple of last things. One is that given this is citizen diplomacy, your active participation is important. So in preparation for the discussion, which will follow the presentations, please write your questions or your comments about the presentations in this Zoom chat. You'll get your Zoom chat questions and comments. We'll get to them when the presentations are finished. So this one last thing is we need to take screenshots, and I'm going to ask our interns to do this because I have recently switched from a Mac to a PC, and I found that PCs are not very good at taking screenshots in my experience. And so Bella If you could take screenshots, I'm going to ask everybody if you would um, smile on three, and then Bella take just
I want to let you know I do have a PC. I don't know how much of a difference that makes to you.
that might, it might make not much of a difference as long as you can take a screenshot. I think it's the fact that I'm both moderating and yeah. So in any case, and do any of our interns have a Mac?
Yeah, I have a Mac.
Okay, Yukta, can you also likewise just take screenshot as well? Um, all right, on three, if you could all smile. One, two, three, smile. Great. You guys took the screenshots. I also have to let a couple of people in here. Hold on a second. Um, so let me ask you to take us for those of you who are just joining us, if you're willing to turn on your cameras, that would be great. I'd appreciate it just briefly, at the least, so that we can take another screenshot on three. Diego, if you can turn on your cameras briefly, guys, and we're going to just about to take screenshots. So on three, one, two, three, smile. Okay, great. You guys took the screenshots. Awesome. All right. We are going to get started with our speakers. Each of our speakers has 15 minutes. I'll be keeping time and then we'll jump into discussion. So hold on a second. Our first speaker is Jeremy Stringer. He is Assistant Director of Pacific Partnerships for Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Jeremy is going to be giving us a sense of the work that AusAid does and Australian version of USAID. And then following him, Jeff Grieco is a senior international business and government relations consultant and former assistant administrator for legislative and public affairs with the U.S. Agency for International Development. So each of you you're encouraged to introduce yourself more fully, but Jeremy first. And Jeremy, I'll be sharing your slides whenever you want.
Sure, I'll give you the signal. I don't know, it'll be like something like or anyway.
That
Um,
either works.
thank you, Paul, and thanks for the introductions. It's really interesting to be part of this presentation. It feels a little bit like Brady Bunch on steroids, but I welcome it and welcome everybody from wherever you are in the world. So my name's Jeremy Stringer. I'm currently in Western Massachusetts, where I live with my family, but I'm from Fremantle in West Australia. And if you drill a hole through the earth from Fremantle right through the centre, you'll come out just off the coast of Maine. My wife tells me so. And the reason I'm here is because my wife is from the local area, and after 20 years in Australia, she said it's time to spend a bit of time closer to her home. So here we are. Through that period, I remain working remotely for the Australian government. So it's amazing how this new age of globalization is really impacting everyone's lives everywhere. So I've been working for the Australian government since 2004. I initially started out in the Australian Agency for International Development, AusAid, and I ended up there. I was already 34 when I joined, so I'd had some experience outside of government. I had uh, uh, through my studies and travels, I had learnt to speak Indonesian fluently. I worked in East Timor during the popular consultation on independence in '99, from '99 through to 2003. And that was a really fascinating period in my life, and I think definitely influenced the direction that it's taken since then. When in East, I don't know if, for those of you who don't know much about East Timor, it was a part of Indonesia, which is an archipelago nation to the north of Australia. Current population is about, I think, 350 million people. Fourth largest country by population in the world, Indonesia. And East Timor was a small part of it, kind of, basically between Sumatra in the west and Papua in the east. East Timor was a part of the island of Timor and was a former Portuguese colony and wanted independence from Indonesia after having been annexed by them in 1975. So that was, I guess, my first experience of the global powers in this world. The United Nations came in after the popular consultation and the violence that followed, and helped the East Timorese rebuild their government, which was actually interesting because it was more like building it from scratch, because they went from an Indonesian style of bureaucracy to a Portuguese style of bureaucracy. And anyway, so that was until about 2003, and then in 2004, I joined the Australian Agency for International Development. Really, really interesting place to work. The aid program, clearly, like USAID, aid program front and centre. The focus of Australia's foreign aid is, I guess, multiple focuses. By working bilaterally with government partners, trying to improve partner governance and essentially try to assist governments to become better attuned to managing their resources more efficiently in order to provide better service delivery to citizens and also to catalyse economic growth. As part of that, I think agriculture and infrastructure are particular focuses bilaterally for the Australian government then and now. There's also, just as the US is, clearly the world's biggest donor in terms of official development assistance, and like the US, I'm unsure of the current status of things with the US, but global health is one of Australia's big investments in the multilateral with multilateral institutions. Underpinning Australia's aid program efforts is gender equality and climate change are big agendas, and I think it's probably every aid dollar that is spent has to justify its funding in some way linked to gender equality and to climate change, at least showing the impacts of the Australian taxpayer funds on those agendas. As a middle power, we like to call ourselves Australia. In Australia, I guess the government says, we punch above our weight internationally, but of course they'd say that. But we are a middle power. We want to build relationships of influence through our engagements internationally, and there's no doubt about it. The aid program is definitely a part of that. So besides doing really good work in reducing poverty and clear objectives and practices to try to achieve those objectives in terms of reduced poverty for partners, there is an element of self-interest in it, in terms of Australia as a good partner, Australia as a good global citizen, and building positive perceptions and images of Australia, both with bilateral partners as well as globally. Interestingly, so when I first joined AusAid in 2004, it was the poverty reduction focus of the aid program was absolutely front and centre, but it was still in Australia's national interest. So the objective statement for the Australian aid program was: aid reduces poverty, our aid program reduces poverty in Australia's national interest. So, a clear fundamental link up front. In about 2013, 2014, that the framing of that changed to say aid serves Australia's national interest through promoting economic growth to reduce poverty. And so I think there was just as domestically, politicians often focus on economic growth and jobs and market development as ways to show that strides are being made in the national interest. So the aid program kind of switched to using that kind of language as well. And this was an interesting period because I was working by that point in Jakarta in Indonesia on a rural economic development program called Prisma, and I'll speak to some of my personal experiences through this to hopefully make it a bit more relevant and directly. So I worked on a rural development program called Prisma, and essentially the Australian government said, okay, we've got $100 million to invest in Indonesia, and we want to help reduce poverty by stimulating and catalysing market development systems for local farmers in eastern Indonesia. Now, eastern Indonesia is the poorer part of Indonesia, and it's also the closest part to Australia. So that's where the national interest lies. So I worked in designing and setting up the institutional structures for the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for promoting rural incomes through support for markets in agriculture. Now, at the time we called this the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Rural Development. It changed its name over a period of time because it was a 10-year program. Very proud of it. I think I was working on it from 2008 to 2010. It was developed as a 10-year program, $100 million, as I said, and the idea was to increase farmer incomes by catalysing market systems. And essentially what this meant was investing in local businesses that were agriculture extension services. So they would go out to farmer communities and provide seed and training how to use seed better to promote better production practices. And very happy to say that over that time, over the 10-year period, it exceeded its target of reaching a million people, well and truly. It almost doubled the average income of the people that it did reach, and it generated $40 million in private sector investment. So, directly. And I think one of the things about working for certainly the Australian government's aid agency, there's a big focus on evidence. And while, of course, there is political spin and numbers are used to, promote good outcomes and good perceptions of Australia, there's also real robust approaches to monitoring and evaluation and learning to inform these processes. But I think what that speaks to is that this was almost a precursor to, well, not precursor, but a part of the changing approaches to the delivery of Australian aid, because there was much less, maybe rather than saying less, I'll say there was a greater focus on how do you leverage commercial sector income and commercial sector practices and commercial sector investment to achieve the development outcomes that you're looking for in terms of reducing poverty in varieties of ways. So another program that I subsequently worked on just very briefly, and this is more from the period of like 2015, was the Australian Development Investments Program. So that was like impact investing. So using aid money to back private equity and commercial tech platforms in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. For instance, there was one called Amarta, which was a digital microfinance platform. I'll just read my notes. Using AI credit scoring to connect rural female-led micro enterprises with institutional investors. Now, $250 million is a pretty significant investment by any means. However, another example is $4.5 billion investment through the Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility for the Pacific, which is about large-scale infrastructure in the Pacific. And those are programs that more information is available online.
Jeremy, you have about 3 minutes, just giving you time.
No worries, sure. That's good timing, Paul. So anyway, since that period, and it was about aid serves national interests through economic growth to reduce poverty. In the last several years, it's changed to be aid advances Australia's national interests through Indo-Pacific stability and shared prosperity. And so it's moved to a period where it's more about partnership and about, I guess, an overlay that looks at building the relationships that underpin our aid efforts as being, critically important to the success of those aid programs. And the program that I currently work on, I'm happy to talk about further as this discussion continues, is a Pacific sports program, and we support high-level and elite Pacific athletes to compete and train in Australia and with Australians, or for their teams to compete in Australian leagues or Australian competitions. One example is Papua New Guinea, where recently the government made a big investment in supporting a Papua New Guinea rugby league team to join Australia's National Rugby League competition, which is, in Australia, the National Rugby League is, one of it's like the American football here. It's huge. It's a really big deal. And so that investment for Papua New Guinea to field a team in Australia's National Rugby League was a strategic investment by the government, both in terms of its development objectives, its foreign aid objectives, but also in terms of its interests in our national security and the stability of the Indo-Pacific. So happy to talk about those programs and my experiences in further depth as this conversation continues. And great to be here today. Thanks, Paul. Is that an awkward silence?
Sorry about that. Hold on a second. Let me just unshare, and Jeff is next.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. I thought what I do, I don't have a PowerPoint, but what I thought I'd do is walk us through a little bit of the U.S. development model for our international assistance, and then kind of drill in on where the current administration is implementing and the methodologies therein. USAID has a pretty prolific history. It came out of the Marshall Plan rebuilding of Europe and eventually led to a large economic and humanitarian assistance initiative. It funded the Green Revolution and Norman Borlaug in India. It helped to implement a global vaccine and HIV/AIDS medication treatment systems across the world through the PEPFAR program, the President's Emergency Program. It stood up a fellow development program called the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which was the first performance-based development model ever implemented, and it's been widely successful. It hasn't reached the scale that it needs to have a huge impact, but it does have a performance methodology. And the funding is 100% a grant to the country. There's no loan, no ongoing payments as long as they're performing to their assistance goals. Most of the MCC staff came out of USAID, and USAID basically helped to design this performance-based model. AID has been instrumental in eradicating many diseases, including polio. We were very close to eradicating polio globally in partnership with many other groups, such as the Gates Foundation. AID has had a prolific role in the successful economic development of many countries, including South Korea, India, Bangladesh, Jordan, Kenya, Senegal, Costa Rica, Philippines. Those are just examples of nations that have made dramatic political progress, but also great economic progress for their people. So our development role in the United States also includes our humanitarian and disaster response role. It is a separate legal authority under the president that is provided for humanitarian and disaster response, but it's included in many of the development assistance descriptions, and indeed its budget is included in the budgetary appropriations process that USAID and State Department go through each year. We have not been successful in this emergency response and humanitarian role in countries like Haiti. And there's a lot of different reasons for that that we can go into. But we have been very successful in other global emergencies, such as the Aceh tsunami, such as the Bangladesh typhoon, the invention of the famine early warning system. It's called FuseNet, digital-based system that allows the U.S. and donors to predict which country is most likely now going to slide into a famine, so we can better pre-position food and other improved seed varieties to those areas. Now, the model that we've done in the United States has a long history of support in law. In our law system, in Congress especially, we divide it between two parts. The appropriations side, which says how much money are we going to allocate to these different programs, to these different countries. It goes down to the minute level. And we have an authorizing component. The authorizing component means that a policy needs to be developed and Congress has to approve it. And they respond usually to the president's annual budget submission, which is a proposed budget submission. Under our Constitution, the president proposes a budget. He doesn't get it, but he proposes it. And then Congress does what they call dispose of the budget. They decide what's going to be included, sometimes with the president's acquiescence, sometimes not. And then the bill is passed by the House and the Senate. It goes to a conference committee. They resolve most of the issues. And the president's representatives are invited into that conference room to be able to offer their inflection on what the president's willing to accept if they want him to sign it and not veto that annual appropriations. So Congress has a very knowledgeable and detailed role in both the money side and on the policy side into influencing what an administration can and cannot do. So under the Trump administration, under our current model with them, they have their own new variation on development, which is different than Trump won his first term. Basically, I think the jury is still largely out on whether this new development model they're implementing is actually going to work internationally or not. And I'll define that as it should make our assistance more efficient, save us money maybe on implementation, using better mechanisms or vehicles to be able to fund programs, for example. But it also should be more effective. And so under an efficiency and effectiveness argument, the Trump administration does believe that by automating and increasing the work that DOGE started, And largely now, USAID has been dissolved as an agency. Technically, it's not gone. Congress has refused to let the administration close the agency. So USAID still exists in law, and many in Congress on both sides, it's on a bipartisan basis, are still somewhat skeptical of the development model that Secretary Rubio and the president are implementing. Now, their model is constructed in his second term on massive cuts to humanitarian, stabilization, and development programs. These cuts, some of which were done without any study or without any justification, these cuts had huge effects on personnel. Many people jumped at early retirement. Many resigned in the face of the cuts, and many were let go even after the cuts were announced. The State Department now has moved most of the development staff from the agency that they wanted. The selection of personnel was the ones they wanted to move. They moved into the regional bureaus at the State Department. So if you're doing, let's say, Vietnam programming, that's now going to be done under the East Asia Program Bureau in the State Department, the Regional Bureau for East Asia, and so on. So the reason that they moved it there is the regional bureaus under the State Department's authorization in law. The regional bureaus are the only bureaus that can formulate both money implementation, the programming of programs, and the policy. So they have the only office in the State Department for their region to be able to do that. Now, those regional assistant secretaries that run each of those regional bureaus do report to the secretary. They have weekly meetings with the secretary and the deputy secretary and others as well. And so they're implementing based on what the secretary and the president have decided. The model includes, for this administration, Secretary Rubio is not only the Secretary of State, he is also now the administrator of USAID. He is also the head of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. He is the head of PEPFAR, the HIV/AIDS assistance. He is the chairman of the board of the Development Finance Committee, the old OPIC structure, which is now moving aggressively to compete with China at the tip of the spear. And he's got a couple of other slots that he runs, including the humanitarian assistance programming for the United States, etc. So the secretary's office has taken on huge responsibilities, and they've tried to deflect some of that by pushing the programming into the regional bureaus itself. They have set up targets and benchmarks, performance benchmarks for certain programs. We're aware that some of the programs that they cut through the DOGE action now have been restarted very quietly, and personnel have been moved into the State Department to run those programs. So they have gone from cutting everything to now re-implementing once they've done a review of the program. Was that the most efficient way to do it? I don't believe so, but that's their model, and they're implementing it based on their political objectives. Recently in the health area, which turns out to be one of the larger budget areas, global health programming, they have decided to set up a new model as well. Their model is going to be a direct bilateral negotiation ending in a compact. They call it a compact, which is exactly what the Millennium Challenge Corp calls its programming negotiations with host countries that they accept an MCC grant from. So they're negotiating global health compacts bilaterally with the host country, and they're promising the host country that the money for the program will be implemented by them, the government, and their implementing partners, not by the international NGOs or by State Department or former USAID contractors. So much of that work has been taken away from the Beltway contractor community and given now to the host country to implement through their own programs in order to escalate or increase the educational knowledge of how to run economic development, health development programs. So the compact is a methodology you're going to hear more of. They've only done a few so far, but we're hearing they have a whole list of compacts that will be negotiated and announced fairly soon.
Jeff, you have about 3 minutes.
Perfect. That's perfect. That's all I'm going to need. Now, what happened to all the contractors' knowledge that was in U.S. contractor community and INGO community? Well, most of those organizations either have gone bankrupt and closed, or they've transitioned to other donors from Europe to the World Bank to UN, and they've tried to focus their efforts on winning business at that implementation side. The administration has cut the UN funding dramatically. So WHO, they've completely pulled out of. They're doing their own bilateral assistance now on Ebola in Africa. They've wanted to build a new Ebola hospital in Kenya without actually asking the Kenyans. And they announced it, and then the Kenyans said, no thanks. So they're still learning. I really think there's a lack of experience because most of the experienced people have now left or departed. Congress and appropriators and authorizers do not support the Trump 2 model for development and repeatedly have shown this on a bipartisan basis. The administration submitted in his budget proposal massive cuts to U.S. aid programs, and Congress ignored it and put all the money back into the finance bill, appropriations bill, and forced the president to sign it. So there is still a lot of pushback, and Congress is serving its role of advice on the budgetary issues. There's no aspect of the U.S. development model, either previous to now or today, that really categorically measures the data across the developing world of the influence or the impact, whether that be efficiency, effectiveness, etc., of our development programs. Your generation has an obligation now. You have AI ramping up. You have the ability now to do this kind of programming, to analyze outside the government and to publish results on what our development programming is actually achieving for our country from a national security perspective, sure, from a foreign policy objectives perspective as well. We had mission performance plans between every mission and the host country that USAID operated. They were negotiated, and the Secretary of State had to sign off on every mission performance plan. Those are gone now, and we're waiting to see what kind of bilateral implementation will be coming going forward. I hope that helps you to understand where we're at, and I'm happy to talk any more questions from anyone. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy and Jeff. We are going to transition to discussion. Just want to remind you, so I'll be moderating this. You should raise your hand if you'd like to. So raise your hand digitally, which should appear at the bottom of your screen. You should also write comments. I just want to remind you, write comments and your questions in the Zoom chat. I did during the discussion raise some questions, which I'll throw at you if we need to. But we are open to discussion. Anybody want to go first? I do want to recognize there are some folks here who are in diplomacy. We have our student interns, many of whom are actually in international relations. So they should have some good questions for you. But also we have folks that I do not know. So Abdelkader, you're joining us. If you could just introduce yourself, remind us where you're joining us from and what brings you to this discussion.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is... You hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Yes. Okay. So, hello, everyone. My name is Abdelkader Choubida. I am from Algeria, but I am live in Madrid. I am studying first year in PhD program in law and government. Focus in digital diplomacy in general. So this is topic. It's interesting for me because in Europe, in European, there are many organizations like Commission European, like Parliament, like Council, like Tribunal European, focus in this kind of type in digital and IA and all the thing of digital, especially the diplomacy. There are two types of diplomacy: diplomacy traditional and diplomacy digital. There are a lot of countries in Europe. The most place in digital in this field. For example, Estonia, and then Germany, and then Sweden. Sweden is Norway. There are 4 or 5 countries focus in governance in digital, anything digital. So this is my research. This is my type. I am focused in this topic because my this is I am interested for this field.
Great. Abdelkader, I'm wondering if you have, coming from Algeria, some experience with either development aid coming from the United States or from Russia or from the European Union that was kind of visible and wondering if it had a particular impact that you are aware of in your country. It's not always visible, but I know that, for instance, when sacks of USAID food they come with that stamp. This is paid for by the American people and so on there. And so, do you have any experience with international development aid in Algeria?
That's a great question. Thanks. I was worked in Algeria for 5 years in the field of governance, administratively office, and then there are participate in many program. For example, here in Poland for 1 month, Erasmus, um, and then uh, my work is administratively, but this year I am focused in my studies in diplomacy. Why diplomacy? Why choose the diplomacy? Because I love it. I love it. The field of diplomacy in general. I love it. The diplomacy, and I choose the Spain because Spain, for me, there are relationship without Algerian people and Spanish people. There are a lot of relation, historic and political, and everything. So now this year I focus in diplomacy digital. Why? Because for many reasons. The first reason, the diplomacy digital, in my research, I am focused in Union European, just in Union European, but exactly in organization of Union European.
Mhm.
For example, Commission European, Parliament European, Council European, Tribunal European, and then there are analyzation without American state and with China,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
the America and China, 2 countries great in diplomacy, in United Nations and a lot of organization that are in New York, Washington D.C., Washington City, for example. Uh, and I am focused to based in diplomacy digital in Europe, but in general there are a lot of countries there are a lot of countries for focus, for example, the United Nations and China. And
Okay.
Algeria, in Algeria, in general, the technology it's intermediate because in Algeria there are diplomacy digital, but uh, in, for example, in Ministry of Étranger, not in the another office, another organization.
Sure.
So that's
So
it.
yeah, so clearly digital diplomacy is kind of a growing of growing interest not only to official diplomats but also to citizen diplomats. So glad you're interested in that. I'm also interested in the fact that so you participated in Erasmus. For those who don't know what Erasmus is, I'm going to mute you by the way, Abdelkader, because there's some background noise. Um, Erasmus is a kind of European, but it involves clearly people in other countries in kind of international educational exchange, and so it's a successful kind of citizen diplomacy program in at least with an educational focus. So it's glad to hear that it's not in some sense kind of traditional development, but it does get us to. Something that Jeremy raised, and Jeremy, I'm wondering about this kind of transition that it appears that the Australian government seems to have experienced over, I gather, decades, which you were pointing out, between a kind of poverty focus initially, at least in your narrative, to a focus on kind of collaboration or partnership, which could happen through things like sport. And so, to that, I'm wondering if you can speak to um, the value of partnership, because you claimed at some point, and you used the word stabilization, that somehow that investment on the part of the Australian government in sports abroad, so international sports, is supporting stabilization or political stabilization, if I'm understanding you correctly, in different countries. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to that more precisely as to how kind of the linkage between competitive international sport and stabilization, whether it's economic or political.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think that's not quite right. I don't think that the sporting relationships will help political stability in other countries. What the sporting link is about the relationship, and it sports provides a way of reaching people that that is perhaps quite unique. Um, you know, I like to describe it as being almost like the soundtrack to a movie. Um, and this doesn't have to be sport, arts and culture also fall within that category, but it's something that it reaches people emotionally. And what it does is to through sharing those moments, through sharing a playing field or through sharing um, the experience of watching teams or athletes compete, um, teams or athletes who people might be passionate about. It creates it helps to create a sense of shared identity because it's people feeling the same emotions, perhaps about different teams or athletes, but nonetheless, you can see each other having the passion about a very human experience. Um, Stabilization, I think, perhaps really what it's about is the international relationship, and assisting to grow better and deeper relationships. So in that way, there's potential to have a more stable relationship over a longer period of time. Several years ago, I worked in we conducted an event to celebrate Fiji's 50th anniversary of independence, and we arranged at the foreign minister's direction an event at at with Rugby Australia, who's the national body for rugby, with their assistance, put on staged an exhibition game between old Australian champions and old Fijian champions. the foreign minister at the time and the Fiji's ambassador to Australia at the time both attended that game. It was during COVID, so travel between countries wasn't really possible, but we did create a digital stream between Australia and Fiji. And so on the other side in Fiji, there was Fijian dignitaries and Australian government officials attending the same event to celebrate Fiji's 50th anniversary of independence, effectively on the sidelines of this sports match. So again, it's a way of providing a platform that helps shape a sense of shared identity. And the deeper part that goes to in terms of the relationship is that I think although it may not be something that is talked about or written about very often, but clearly the ownership of foreign aid and of Australia's attempts to support partner countries and global and institutions to make strides in terms of reducing poverty. If there's not ownership of those efforts by the people who are actually driving the partnership, then it's more likely to fail. And I think Jeff spoke to that briefly in his presentation.
Right. Yeah, and I imagine, there's commercial value as well to sports. Sports are kind of a growing industry across the world, so there's that value internationally.
Yeah, look, I think that's the commercial aspect is more about providing for sustainability rather than a commercial return. I think the commercial returns aren't that significant. It's really the sustainability of the effort and therefore the sustainability of the relationships that are the important part of that.
Okay. So I do want to get to some questions that are in the Zoom chat, including some. So Michelle Bond has a question, but Diego has his hand raised. Diego is joining us from Bolivia and has been actually involved in U.S. So to speak, international aid, but in the educational sphere. Diego.
Thank you so much, Paul. Pleasure to be with all of you again. I wanted to ask or make a comment first, but also ask Jeffrey Grieco something about USAID. I have retired from the U.S. Embassy in Bolivia after 25 years, only last year, basically. But I have been involved in two things. The first one was education. We had a huge project with education and Bolivian public institutions, and then something that I also got involved, but it was more on a personal basis. Although I was also trying to help the communities and so on and so forth. That had to do with coffee. So those I can tell you, especially the coffee project was incredibly successful for this country. And even though this country is complicated, Bolivia is a very complicated. I don't know if you've seen the news, but it's it's on the news recently, not positively. But anyways, the coffee project that existed was enormously successful and has placed Bolivia on the map at a very high level with coffee production and coffee quality. But I just wanted to ask Jeffrey Greco. I know the answer could be very long, but if you could very briefly respond to us and tell us a little bit about USAID. It's still a little bit of a quandary to me. I'm not sure I understand what they have done with it. I was sad. I mean, I knew that reform was necessary, but I was a little bit sad to see that apparently there was something, some of the reforms were a little bit radical. And I wanted to ask him, what if you were the person reforming USAID, what would you keep? What would you eliminate? And what would you change? Thank you.
Okay.
Great question.
A very astute question. All right. So USAID still exists in law, but it no longer exists in practice. Let me simplify basically what's going on. we were just talking about stabilization. So inside USAID, we divide into three very simple buckets. Assistance that is humanitarian or disaster response related, stabilization assistance, and development assistance. Now, under stabilization, and this gets to your question of what should we be keeping, every new administration wants to reform and transform not just USAID, but State Department and other departments in the government. They all do it. I've been living through all of them, and it happens. Each one has their own view, and they want that view implemented. So you should expect that change is coming whenever there's a transfer from one administration to the next. Even within the same party structure, it could be massively different programming. In the stabilization area, USAID has been able to implement what is called transition programming. That's what an office that used to be called OTI, the Office of Transition Initiatives, it was given the only what we call notwithstanding authority by Congress to move very quickly and spend money in countries that are transitioning out of communism, authoritarianism, things of that nature, and to help them move rapidly into an open press, improved democracy and elections, etc. OTI was one of the most successful, according to General Petraeus, according to any military person that worked with them in the countries that they were operating in. OTI was a very successful program. OTI, unfortunately, under this administration, was put in a box and then slowly eliminated. So the leading stabilization assistance program for the United States in host countries that are fragile or in some cases failed, but OTI tried to operate in fragile states, not in failed states, which require different programming necessities on the ground, security, et cetera. So I would keep anything that makes America's role in the world stronger and more influential so that we can affect change that's in our national interest, in our foreign policy interest. But I don't want it to be so narrow that we only think of national security, because any mission performance plan that you've read, and I've read hundreds of mission performance plans, our role in the world is not just for our own national security interests. People expect us to lead in countries as one of the largest donors for them to be able to build up and share other roles that the UN multilaterals might take. Our bilateral partners in Europe might say, hey, listen, you guys take PEPFAR and HIV. We're going to spend our money on health implementation at the field level. So there's partnerships that develop with the host country, but also with other donors. A lot of that has gone away, and it's created great anger. And I travel all the time to Asia, to Europe. There's a lot of anger right now, and it's real. And so I would keep the things that help us the most. I would eliminate things that aren't working and have been proven not to be working. And then I would change, would I reopen USAID as an agency? You know, every secretary wanted to move USAID into the State Department. These guys did it. And the problem was they eliminated all the people who knew how to implement once they moved in. It's technically the programs moved into states' offices, but the people to run the programs were no longer there. And then after firing them, they recontacted many of them to come back and work, and many of them refused. So it was not done in a way that would have really made it, I think, a better change for the United States. So we're going to have to live with that. Whoever comes after Trump has a chance to reform again. And let's hope that next time we're going to get it all right. So I hope that answers your question, Diego.
Yeah, and Diego, thanks for the good question. Jeff, thanks for your answer. I think, one common thread it appears between what Jeff and Jeremy are both saying is kind of the importance of development aid for building relationships that can, it sounds like, mitigate distrust, mitigate anger and allow kind of to smooth issues that may come up that would otherwise kind of aggravate situations between countries if you have kind of longstanding relationships and longstanding relationships buttressed by a professional workforce and diplomacy that's been at it for a long time and has built those relationships over time. That seems to be important. I do want to. I don't know if Michelle, if you're listening, but Michelle is sits on our board of advisors and is a former diplomat herself with the U.S. State Department. Michelle, you with us? I'm wondering if you can raise your question. She may not. She may not be. She may not be with us right now. So let me just express what she said in the Zoom chat, and then perhaps have get your comments on this. She says, "Is it fair to say that USAID didn't do a good enough job of clearly defining?" I'm trying to read this. There we go. I'm trying to read this of clearly defining and demonstrating the importance of their work to U.S. economic. And my computer doesn't seem to allow me to read the rest of this, but U.S. economic security interests, there you are, Michelle, including contributing to ordinary Americans' prosperity. Sorry, got technical issues on my end. But Michelle, do you want to elaborate? Oh, you're on mute currently.
Yeah, sorry, I took myself off screen because I had to go somewhere. But I've been on the discussion. I was just struck with Jeremy's initial presentation, how for decades the Australians have been very intentional and clear that programs should be designed and described in terms of not only the good that they do, but also how that redounds to the benefit very broadly of Australians who are paying for the programs. And so to their prosperity, to their economic security, to the regional stability, development of new commercial markets potentially, et cetera. I recognize that even if the US government had done the same thing consistently and excellently, the incoming administration could have said, well, those are all lies, don't listen to them. So it might not have helped. But on the other hand, it might have meant that there was a far, far greater understanding across the United States of why we should do what USAID was doing, apart from just being nice people, just being generous, et cetera. How did it help us? So that I just was curious to hear the thoughts of a USAID expert about the efforts that were made in that direction and whether more could and should have been done across all administrations, because it was always just a little bit controversial and people always thought we were spending about 100 times more than we actually were.
Yes, great. Can I answer that, Paul? Is it okay?
Yeah.
I appreciate this question. This is at the heart of the issue. Under law, USAID is prohibited from spending money anywhere in the domestic United States, whether this be for media development, whether it be for trips to go meet chambers of commerce or Rotary clubs so we could spread the news. There was huge restrictions on us doing it, and it was for a reason. It happened many years ago that some of the USAID money intended for overseas was spent politically here in the United States. This was decades ago. And so these restrictions were put into law. But what we could do, and what I did and focused on, was the complete reform of USAID's public affairs global activities. We met with the State Department public affairs leadership and Secretary Powell and later Secretary Rice to build a development outreach capability, a capacity for USAID missions to help the State Department PAOs to better clarify what U.S. programs are ongoing in the countries that they're living in and how they benefit both the host country and the American people. And so it took us about 2 or 3 years to get that put into law and to get the budgets approved for that. And it was all done successfully. And so USAID was communicating directly to the State Department PAOs, public affairs officers, who controlled the message at the embassy level. And so we did it in a way that was respectful of states, so they didn't look at USAID as a threat to their prerogatives. And we made it so much so that the PAOs all emailed me repeatedly, and the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, saying, thank God we have now, USAID officers who can communicate what we're doing in the country for our interests and for the host country in a way. Many of those USAID communications were then put into the annual budget process, so the descriptions of that work were used by each administration to help define their appropriations request for the next year in their budget. And so the language was able to pervade into important documents. And Congress also thanked us for doing that. That's all gone now. All the docs, we call them docs, development outreach, communications officers, all of them have been terminated. And there is no more communication really, except what the State Department embassies and the headquarters want to have communicated. That's my short answer.
Jeremy, I'm wondering if you can speak. It may be undiplomatic for you to speak to American diplomacy and development aid and the Trump administration's approach, but if you can chime in on what you find from the Australian vantage point about this question around essentially kind of selling development aid to the people who are paying for it, when somebody could argue, why is this money flowing out of our country when it could be spent here at home? That's been the general thrust oftentimes in the United States. It's worth noting in the United States that there is a class division, a shifting class division in the political parties. The base now of the Trump administration is generally less educated, and less educated people are less likely to travel abroad, less likely to have any knowledge of what's going on abroad, and let alone the ways in which the United States is for better or worse involved in the wider world. I suspect that's true in Australia as well. But do you have any thoughts, Jeremy, on this? On kind of making the case for international development to a home audience.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's actually something that through various stages over the last 20 years have had to spend some time thinking about these things as various challenges domestically have cropped up regards how do you explain the Australian aid program and its impacts to, for instance, your grandmother or your uncle, or somebody who's not part of the bubble that you might be working in on a day-to-day basis. And there's no easy answers. I would say that it's not in terms of public debate. It's not. It emerges from time to time, but it's not part of a regular calls for, what's Australian aid doing? It's not doing anything good for the country. It seems to emerge, and then various stakeholders will speak to the value of the Australian aid program, and then it will go back under the surface and resurface again. But Australia has a very vibrant NGO sector, international NGO sector, funded by a local philanthropy in Australia, charitable giving, and also the Australian government's aid program. And so there's probably an intersection of interests there, and consciousness among enough people that there is a critical mass of support, or at least the minimum required to achieve a level of satisfaction in the community with what foreign aid is providing overall. I would say that Australians I think we're a small nation by population. I think it's 26 million people in Australia now. We like to think, as most people do, that we're quite generous by nature. So perhaps as a national characteristic, that's perhaps one of the reasons that it doesn't emerge too often. And I guess the last thing I'd say is that I mentioned earlier that there's a really robust approach to monitoring and evaluation and tracking the data of Australian aid. What are we buying for the money that's being spent? What are Australian taxpayers buying for the dollars spent on agriculture extension in Indonesia, for climate change, improved climate change practices in Fiji. And so there's a really, I think, certainly ingrained reporting processes and reporting culture within Australia's aid program, which provides a really rich database to draw on when there's needed evidence in support of arguments such as why do we need foreign aid and what is foreign aid doing for us?
Mm-hmm. I'll mention a book I read a couple of years ago that came out about world affairs councils, and I think there are these bodies that are locally rooted in particular cities in the United States and the wider world that are devoted to international affairs that bring together people who do international business locally, as well as academics and others, and that those have been a more grassroots, and there has been kind of a more grassroots vision for how you organize international affairs in a country so that more people are involved in it, and there's less of this kind of lashback and quick dismissal of international development aid because more people are informed about it. The problem is the people who tend to show up to World Affairs Councils and such things tend to be middle and upper class, very educated, etc. So there's still a relatively limited segment of the population. So it is a challenge. I think probably an international challenge as to how do you make international affairs something that people can touch and feel and see at a local level, even among people who are not middle and upper class and travel and have studied international relations. So I do want to turn to Bella, one of our interns. You had a comment, Bella, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that comment that you had in the Zoom chat, based upon kind of the class discussions you've had.
Yes, so I'm Bella. I'm an intern, and I something that's come up a lot in my classes, like in a lot of discussions when we talk about both theoretical applications and like case studies and real world examples, are the whether or not like development projects, depending on how they're designed and implemented, um, like further perpetuate a lot of the systems or the reasons that they're there in the first place, like whether there's like undue reliance on them, depending how they're implemented. And I think that that also connects very strongly to the way a lot of Americans feel about not wanting to continue funding those, or and maybe it's true for other countries as well, but that, oh well, if they're just going to rely on us, if they're just going to depend on us for these things, then what's the point and why are we funding them? But then also on the level of like the country receiving the developmental support, there's the question of, well, does this actually help them become like autonomous in that way, or does it perpetuate the cycle of like in, I believe it's like world systems theory, where it's just a loop of who's depending on what, on who for what product or what support.
Jeff and Jeremy, this does get to this. Bella's good question does get to dependence and whether or not aid, in fact, creates dependence. This is, in fact, one of the arguments that the Trump administration has made for kind of a focus on commercial development rather than humanitarian aid, and trying to lift people up as to, and this is kind of more broadly a concern of the Republican Party in the United States, which is to not create dependencies which governments might aggravate, but rather to make people less dependent on government. How do you guys in both the Australian and American context respond to Bella?
I can go first if you want, Jeremy. So uh, there are so many ways that the USAID funding and assistance is helping Americans, and the ones who know it are largely farmers. We ship more humanitarian aid because our law requires us to buy American grain, American soybean, and other things that are protein rich for developing countries that can't feed themselves largely. We don't buy it overseas from other networks and so forth. So every time you talk to an American farmer who is shipping through Galveston, which is one of the main ports we use for our humanitarian shipments, those farmers know that their food is, they're being paid for at the market rates, first of all, and secondly, that it's going to help someone who's starving. And they know that. The farmers know that. The Rotary clubs know that as well. However, there is a perception that has been created, some of it in total myth, some of it true, about, and this is also the same for our Defense Department, I might say, that they keep giving contracts to large companies or large development implementers who've had the same contract for 4 years, and it's a 5-year contract. Why aren't we giving this to host country programs and so forth? That needs to happen more and more, and I'm totally in favor of that. The private sector, U.S. private sector, can play a role, but more importantly, the private sector of the host country needs to develop a market-based system because that's going to bring them the most stability, and it helps with democracy building as well. Market-based systems have been proven now to be able to help stabilize a country and move it forward in its development aperture. And I feel like the private sector can do more, both host country and our international private sector. We already have great participation, like JP Morgan is deeply involved in a bunch of HIV programs overseas, funding them and funding some of the big international multilateral vehicles that are used to help save people's lives. Just on PEPFAR alone, we've saved, I think it's now over 28 million people's lives because of PEPFAR. And that number keeps growing. And in Africa, they know that it was the United States who started this and has kept them alive. Does that translate then into more support for our programs? I don't know. It's hard to do that, going forward, especially because do we want to have people say that we're taking advantage of the aid we gave them to get them to promote us? That's not our interest either. So I hope that answers it. But Jeremy, I'd love to hear your answer too.
Jeremy?
Yeah, thanks. This issue of dependence is, I think it's been around for a long time in foreign aid, and I think it's probably one of those things where it's ongoing learning. Certainly in my time over the last 20 odd years, the Australian aid program, it's not huge. Like it's typically it's been 4 to 5 billion Australian dollars a year since I've been working for the government. That's got to cover a lot of territory. There's a lot of problems, a lot of issues. There's not You can't solve everything. You can't address every vulnerable population. So there's decisions to be made about how and where you target it, and that's those are strategic decisions made on a balance of like where is the most impact kind of going to be had in terms of reducing poverty, who are the people that are really most in need, where are the vulnerable populations, balanced against what does Australia need? What is Australia going to achieve through this? That's going to help our own stability, help ensure our own security in the world as well. Um, in terms of like so humanitarian assistance clearly for the Australian aid program, and I'm sure for USAID as well, it's just when there is a disaster, when there is famine, when there is real needs, clearly there's an immediate uh, there are immediate concerns, right? And so resources are allocated, distributed, and bang, you've got assistance going in country to meet, for instance, the Aceh tsunami springs to mind. Huge international effort to address that, and then you get it's post humanitarian disaster period, and then there's kind of I guess a it's more about, well, what do you do to ensure stable, sustainable systems that people can rely on and that don't rely on foreign aid, because foreign aid is never going to be there for an extended period of time. I think I guess my reflection is that over my time in working on aid, it has been about supporting better governance in partner countries, so that governments are able to allocate their resources more efficiently and utilise their resources more efficiently to deliver services needed. And then more recently, over the last 10 to 15 years, it's been about private sector engagement and about commercial sector engagement, because that's really where you have potential to provide those sustainable outcomes, because there are commercial incentives for people to engage and to keep providing services, or to keep trying to achieve outcomes, because there is incomes associated with it. I spoke earlier about the agricultural extension program Prisma, and when we were developing that, it was really a case of looking at long evidence of projects that had gone into villages and worked there for 5 years to help farmers learn better practices, and then the project had left, and then a year later, farmers were back to their same practices, despite the fact of having implemented and witnessed better outcomes over that period of time while the project was on the ground. And so clearly, there's strong evidence that it takes a lot to change ways of working. It takes a lot to change the cultural systems in which other, say, commercial incentives are embedded. And so I think that has led to a larger, taking a broader and very sophisticated look at these situations to understand what the dynamics are, and try and make decisions about how to fill gaps and how to incentivize change that provides sustainable solutions.
Yeah, it sounds like it's real change in the long term requires long-term investment that changing administrations may not be willing to provide, which is kind of a dilemma. But it's only with long-term investments that you might see the kind of long-standing social, institutional, cultural changes that reduce dependency in the long term. So this is a really rich discussion. As always, we tend to have rich discussions on these in these meetings. I do want to ask. There are some people we unfortunately did not get to hear from. Ahmad Shahzad, who just joined us. Ahmad, if you could put in the Zoom chat what city and country you're joining us from. We have at least one of our interns, actually supposed to be two. Yukta, you should be in the attendance sheet. Adding so anybody that's new. So Ahmad, if you can just introduce yourself in the Zoom chat, type your city and your country, that would be great. great. And then also, if you're willing to share your email, we'd love to keep in touch with you. Jake, Arlia, and Asta Prendergrast. I'm probably butchering your names. I apologize. And we also have somebody named a user. If you guys can introduce yourselves in the Zoom chat, just let us know. Where you're coming from, what city and what country, and your email. If you can share that as well, we'd love to keep in touch with you and let you know about future meetings. We're going to finish off by sharing the CDI bulletin, which comes out with every one of these quarterly meetings. So I'm going to share that on screen and go through it, and then Yukta, just for future reference, Yukta actually helped with this, helped to create this CDI bulletin, and that CDI bulletin is an effort for us to kind of share what's going on in citizen diplomacy, and kind of related things, things related to citizen diplomacy. So I'm going to share my screen. And take you through this briefly. So the CDI bulletin usually begins with some sort of either a conference or some sort of significant event coming up. Given that the topic of this meeting was international development aid and its kind of impacts for diplomacy and relations between countries, we chose to focus on this coming Finance for Development conference that's happening in Spain, actually. This July 13th through the 17th, to discuss financing for development, and that will involve civil society organizations and private sector organizations as well. On page 2, we have more meetings, but also other resources. So the Society for International Development, which is based in the United States, is having its meeting very soon on June 18th. The International Conference on Sustainable Development is happening later in September 9th and 10th in Rome, Italy. There is a conference on advancing women's leadership in politics, economy, and diplomacy, and I thank Yukta for bringing women into the picture, because that sometimes is neglected, and women have in many ways an outsized and unrecognized role in international development. UNITAR, which is a branch of the UN, has a variety of resources available, some of which are free for training people in diplomacy. And then lastly, here we have a notice about our Family Diplomacy Initiative, which is our own practice as an organization of citizen diplomacy, particularly family diplomacy. We have these ongoing monthly meetings, which we encourage people to join to participate with their families in a basic form of citizen diplomacy, international dialogue on family. Page 3 covers some articles, recent articles, videos, and other content that have come out related to citizen diplomacy. So you have articles on artificial intelligence and its impact on diplomacy, on multilateral diplomacy through international expositions, citizen sports diplomacy. So not just the Olympics, although the Olympics is an example of citizen sports diplomacy, but also kind of grassroots citizen sports diplomacy. China's impact on international development. There's an article here by a student on why citizen diplomacy matters, as well as something on media and cultural diplomacy in the BRICS, those developing countries, major developing countries. There's a video here about ordinary people and how citizen diplomacy can build a safer future. It's a video interview, and then Strategic Impatience and the Undoing of American Soft Power by a former diplomat at the CPD, which is based at the University of California. There are 2 recent books that have come out on the digital frontier and its impact on diplomacy. So that may be of interest to our to the gentleman from Algeria, and we also have a book that came out last year on sister city diplomacy. And then lastly, if you want to know more about the two speakers, they kindly answered questions about their work and its impact and why it matters, as well as what they like to do in their free time. So you'll see that on the last pages. We will be disseminating the CDI bulletin, as I mentioned, along with a variety of other materials in this email that will go out in the next couple of weeks. And so it will include the CDI bulletin, a video recording of this meeting, some screenshots, and other content from the meeting. Lastly, I do want to remind you all, if you're not connected with us as yet, I'm going to repost in the Zoom chat a variety of ways that you can connect with us. So hold on a second. Let me put this in the Zoom chat. And you'll see here that we have, again, you can subscribe to get the notice of our meetings and the CDI bulletins. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, as well as YouTube. You can follow us there, and you'll see the video recording soon there, as well as prior recordings of our meetings going back to, I think, 2021. And you can also become a member of Learning Life's International Democracy and Diplomacy community. There is a link there. If you'd like to support our work, please do so. There are a couple of things I'll share with you in a moment here in the Zoom chat. Hold on a second. So that is essentially it. You can make a donation to our work to support what we essentially do, which is to try to spread democracy and diplomacy, and particularly citizen diplomacy. And if you can, we'd greatly appreciate if you share that brief invite in your social media network. That's an encouragement for people to just get notice of our CDI meetings. So you can just simply cut and paste that and share it to your social media. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for your time. I want to thank Jeremy and Jeff again. Jeff is actually on his way to, I think, Dubai and then Uzbekistan and then Afghanistan, because among other things, he's trying to help stabilize the economy in Afghanistan so we don't have war. And he was just telling me about that yesterday. Jeremy is actually the husband of my dear friend Gina Dario. So I'm really appreciative of the fact that he took some time away from his workday to be with us, to talk about, to give us a perspective on Australian development aid. So thanks, everybody. Diego, great to see you again. Thanks to our interns, Abdelkader. Great to meet you. Hope to see you at upcoming meetings. Bye, everybody.